Hey y'all. So I started recording this on TikTok, and then of course, once I was really getting into it, then I was having technical problems. But I'm gonna say what I need to say. Okay. You know, everybody else putting their perspectives out there, so I'm gonna put my perspective out there. Now, first off, you know, I think it's interesting that we're having this conversation and we're really paying like more attention. I mean, I'm sure there was people who were paying attention to what was happening in the conservative world of things, but I think it's interesting that we're having more of a conversation where it's forcing us to really pay attention to both sides of the aisle. Um, however, you know, anyway, that's beside the point. So before I get into the part about the Nicki Minaj interview, I think a lot of people have their opinions and perspectives about um, Erika Kirk and just her like response and her reaction to the unfortunate passing of her husband Charlie Kirk, and just like the reaction and everything. Now, I mean, I've had my own like perspectives about it, and I don't know. It's interesting for me because like I don't know. I just feel like for like so much of the things that I pay attention to are like the spiritual things, just because like so much of that is revolved around my life. Like I can't help but to notice the spiritual side of things or the deeper meanings or the symbolisms and stuff like that because so much of my life revolves around that. And if you know, you know. Now, what I feel like two things could be true at the same time. As it pertains to like, some of the interviews that she had been doing and in response to like Candace Owens having a lot to say about Turning Point and like some conspiracy stuff leading up to his passing. Now, the thing that really bothers me, the thing that bothers me is when, Candace Owens, which I respect her level of journalism. She does her research. She's very thorough and she says what she means and she means what she says. And she stands 20 toes down. If she had extra toes, she'd stand on them too about what she puts out there. And she's very articulate and she makes a stand for what she's saying, right? So, and I feel like regardless of how you feel about her, if you're liberal, and I know she gets a lot of pushback from the Black community sometimes, but then there's people who are like, look, regardless of how y'all feel about her, she stands on business and she does the research and she really gets into the nitty gritties of the details that a lot of people overlook. And for that reason, I think it's always like worth listening to what she has to say, even if it may be controversial. But the thing that I was going to say that kind of upsets me is when people in the industry who knows how spiritual and how symbolic these things can be, when she brings them to light and they're like, oh, that's conspiracy theory. Oh, you're looking too deep into it. I'm like, now y'all people in this industry know exactly how these things move, right? Y'all know the spiritual aspect of it. Y'all know it be witches and warlocks out here. You know that it's always more going on than what we see on the surface. So like, why even try to gaslight her like that? Like, I feel like when people do that, they're intentionally either trying to like what it could be is that like they're low key trying to like protect her so she doesn't say too much, and so she doesn't put like too much of a target on herself. And maybe they're trying to just like calm it down. It's like, oh, that's conspiracy, even though they know a lot of the stuff that she be saying really happens. Like, come on. I think we're in a day and age where a lot of the stuff that we saw was conspiracy, or it's like, oh, the Illuminati and this and that. Like, we know that like those things are true. Like, I feel like we're at the point where we can just like say call a spade, right? Okay. With that said, when there had been a lot of stuff in the media as it pertains to like Erika Kirk and handling like her husband's funeral and everything. I feel like there was a lot of controversy about how she was responding and how she was reacting, especially the interview that she did with Fox News. And she was just like, can I just have one thing without y'all, telling me that it needs to be done like this and it needs to be done like that? Like, can I just have one thing for me and my kids? I think the thing with that, I can understand people's speculations. However, I also understand that it's chess, not checkers, and the warfare is spiritual. And, there's people's tactics and how they navigate these treacherous streets out here. sometimes it requires you to play a little bit of both sides. I'm not saying that that's what she's doing, but I'm just saying that that's what some people do, you know? And I'm not, and why would I say that? Because I feel like there are people, like when you think of chess, right? Of course, in a perfect world, you would like to capture the king without having to lose any of your pieces. But in the game of chess, if you're playing on the light side, playing against the dark, there are certain moves that you're going to have to make where you might have to sacrifice certain pieces in order to get ahead for the bigger cause and win the game. And now, am I saying that that's what happened with Charlie? I don't know. Maybe depending on who was playing what game, maybe. He could have been a different piece in other people's games. In some people's games, he could have been the bishop on their team, and other people's games, he could have been on the other side of the board. So, I feel like some of that could have been going on. And then at the same time, there's some people that in navigating these spiritual worlds that's happening behind the scenes within a lot of these things in politics and in tech and business have to play both sides, just to stay afloat. So them people don't come after you. Right. And who are them people? Like, I'm just going to say it plain and say it straight up. Look, the devil be running rampant out here. And that's just the facts. A lot of these secret societies and organizations and stuff like that, even if there's different secret society groups, a lot of them groups are backed by Satan. And I'm just going to say the quiet part out loud. That's just what it is. The warfare is spiritual. So let's just put that out there. Demons are real, angels are real, and they move through people. And a lot of these events and stuff that be happening, is a lot of spiritual stuff that's happening behind the scenes. Even though you may see a tragedy on the news, like, oh, this school shooting happened. On the spiritual side of things, that's the entities on that side moving and bobbing and weaving through people. For example, earlier this year with that shooting that happened at the church with the trans kid, I remember seeing a post that was going over like his paperwork or her, sorry to misgender this person, to their paperwork. And there was this image of them looking at themselves in a mirror, and they saw this like demonic entity, and was basically talking about how like they weren't recognizing themselves and just felt like they were having these intrusive thoughts telling them what to do to lead into this. And sometimes it happens just like that. With that said, and funny enough, even with me explaining that reminds me of an experience that I had personally in my own life. Like, it wasn't anything like major at the time, but I remember I was like talking to this guy. And I remember like I was looking in the mirror, or we were looking in the mirror. He was standing behind me, and we were looking at the mirror together. And I remember seeing like this shadowy figure over his head. And it kind of like freaked me out a little bit. It kind of reminded me of like Baphomet, but I don't think that's who it was. It could have been like maybe a lower level entity, but I remember seeing it as clear as day. And I have moments like that where I do see things bobbing and weaving, shifting in these, in these realms. And a lot of times you can't see it physically with your physical eye, but if you have discernment and your spiritual awareness, sometimes you can, see shadows and stuff moving. So I say that to say, like, the spiritual stuff is really real out here. And so when you have people who are advocating for Christianity and really trying to elevate God and elevate Jesus, like, it's not just like let's build this community and read the Bible. Like, the warfare out here is really real. Like, Satan and his peoples and his entities are really doing works to try to disempower and bring down Jesus and God and those who love Jesus and those who believe in Jesus and elevate Jesus's name. There's power in Jesus's name, whether you're Christian or not, regardless of your spiritual beliefs. Because me personally, I believe that I feel like religion is very much like cultures and nationalities. Like, you know, we all are, at least in this vessel, have human bodies, but we're all of different races. We may come from different countries. We might have different nationalities. And with those different countries and nationalities, there's probably different cultures and different religious beliefs. And I feel like there's enough space in this world, in the spiritual world, where all of it could be true at the same time. Like, just as much as there's people who believe in Jesus and there's people who maybe practice ATRs, which is African traditional religions, and believe in the Orishas. And there's people who may believe in Greek mythology and, you know, and honor and worship those gods and goddesses. Like, I feel like in the spiritual realm, just like how us as physical people, we all exist, even though we come from different backgrounds. I feel like that's the same thing in the spiritual world. And there are active players at hand on the darker side that are running things and ruling things and actively, symbolically doing work to disempower Jesus in the name of God. And, you know, and I don't mean to sound too preachy, but I'm just keeping it real, you know, and that's just the facts. And I don't, and look, you could be like, oh, that's too deep. And, you know, it's funny enough that I'm having this conversation, like the day after Christmas, right? You know, oh, this is too deep, it's too serious. Well, it's real out here. It is deep and it is serious out here. You know, the warfare being spiritual is a real thing. And so much so that if you don't study these things and you don't learn these things, you would think that it's conspiracy. And the people who choose to fall into ignorance of believing that it's conspiracy rather than doing the work to actually learn about it, you fall prey to being taken advantage of and being enslaved into a spiritual system that you don't even know. For example, like, you know, I'm trying to like say this in a way where I like, and let there be light. Hold on, y'all. Let's unplug out the matrix for a second. Yeah, let there be some light up in here. So, yeah, the spiritual is warfare. I mean, the warfare is spiritual. And you will have symbolic things in play that you might just think is like, oh, this is just somebody's album. But, like, for example, I know a lot of people were criticizing like Sabrina Carpenter's album cover for the man's best friend with the, you know, the hair and her on her knees and all her and all this stuff. And most people were criticizing it from a standpoint of it being misogynistic. But for me, knowing what I know and just being spiritually aware and having the discernment that I have, you know, I saw it from a spiritual standpoint. I think it's not a mistake that her, of all people, because there's so many different artists that can be considered sex symbols or, you know, promote sex in their music or whatever. But I think it's specific that it's her because her name is Carpenter. And because them people that work in them offices and them industries, and when you have these artists that have put out their albums and are going on tour and they're endorsing these products and they're told this is what you're going to sell, we're going to use your image this way, when you put out this album you're going to sell this hair care product, you're going to be in this commercial, and then we're going to go on this tour right here. And to them, you know, they might just be living the dream. And say for whatever reason in her mind, you know, she's just expressing herself as an artist and expressing herself as a woman. But the people in the office who are aware of the symbolisms, who are aware of the spiritual aspect of things, they can see that as an opportunity to spiritually pimp her in a way where they degrade her, which would be symbolic of degrading the carpenter, where people don't even recognize it. And they'll say that, oh, she wants to do this. This is just her brand. This is how she expresses herself. And that could be true. Two things could be true at the same time. But you have to be aware of these things to know that that's how they play. And they'll say, it reminds me of the Zora Neale Hurston quote, where I'm paraphrasing, but if you don't speak up about your pain, they'll kill you and say that you enjoyed it. And that's what that situation reminds me of when I see it from a spiritual standpoint. And some people will say, oh, you looking too deep into it. That's just how she likes to, do her music. And that can be true. That can be true as well. But if you're not aware of the spiritual side of things, you can also be oblivious to the people who work in those offices and know exactly why they picked that album cover and why they tell her, you got to perform at this city at this time and wear this outfit, wear these costumes, and you got to shoot your music video like this. And you got to do these symbols in the music video like this, because all of it is symbolic and it's intentional. They know what the fuck they're doing, but it's a matter of whether we peep what they're doing and whether some people are either going to stand up to it or just go along with it. Now, there's some people that I feel like are in positions of power that maybe they don't agree with everything that they feel they have to do, but they have to do it because a lot of the people at the top of the top of the top in certain industries and different spaces, you only get there working with them people and doing those contracts and selling just a little bit of your soul a bit. I mean, and look, and that's just what it is. And, and when I was talking about Erika Kirk, I feel like I'm not saying her specifically, but I'm saying that there are probably people who take this position of feeling like to some degree you got to play both sides just so you can stay on the board. And to win the game, there are certain sacrifices that you have to make just to get ahead and stay afloat without being completely wiped off the board. Because the warfare is spiritual and it's chess, not checkers. And in chess, you do have to make certain sacrifices in order to get ahead, to eventually get across the board and hopefully checkmate the king. But I feel like as it pertains to like the spiritual side of things in the industry and how it affects this planet and souls and in people's lives, it's really a matter of awareness. That's one thing. And also knowing who exactly is the enemy. Because you can say like, okay, it's bigger than the public figures that we see on the news and the music artists that we see. It's the people that they have to go in those offices and negotiate with and make deals with. And if you want like a visual representation of how I feel like that goes down, watch Rihanna's Auntie Diaries. When she put out that Auntie album, and there was like visuals that went along with it because what she was selling the Samsung phone, which happens to be the phone that I'm on right now, a Samsung phone, and so in promoting the Samsung phone, she had these visuals that was kind of like diary entries leading up to the rollout of that album. And in real time when that was coming out, it could seem like dark and like, I don't know, like some people's like, oh, this seems very demonic and this and that. And maybe that's the point. Maybe the point is for it to be demonic, but not demonic in a way where she's trying to promote it, but demonic in a way where she's shedding light to things that's happening. And I feel like knowing what we know now, if you go back and watch that, a lot of the stuff that might have been went over our heads has a lot more symbolism and more value and, just more information that we might not have been privy to then versus what we know now. So that's one aspect. And the reason why I bring that up is because there's certain scenes where, you know, she's in this house and there's like kids running around and all of that, and then eventually like she gets in the studio and she starts making music, and then she gets in this office, and you know she's in this waiting room and she's looking at these people with all these typewriters and all these things, and this little girl gives her a crown. And I feel like that's symbolic to like how, you know, some of the darker things that happen in this industry that pertains to like children and energy harvesting, where in order for certain people at the top to be elevated, there has to be some type of um I feel like the word is Igor or egregor or something like that, but there has to be some type of like an energetic pull. So like for example, like if you've ever heard of destiny swapping, it's basically when somebody tries to like copy what you do and like swap destinies with you. So say if like you know you got a good job and a good relationship, and then say you got a friend around you that like notices that energy around you and wants a part of that energy, they'll start copying what you do, copying what you wear, copying where you go, and even like to an extent where they try to like take your man and all these things to literally try to destiny swap with you. It's something like that, but a more sinister way where you have somebody living at the bottom and they're this source of energy for you. And, you know, say you like they come up with ideas or like they have a powerful spirit to them. And these power structures will keep them spiritually enslaved to be an energy source and a power plant for people at the top to thrive. Because that's real too. I would know. But my point in saying all of this is that, again, the warfare is spiritual and it's chess, not checkers. And multiple things can be true at the same time. And it really is a matter of where people stand. And for me, I'm very radical as it pertains to this. Like I'm very clear on like, you know, I don't fuck with Satan. I don't. Um, or his dominions and his deities or whatever, spiritual things. I don't fuck with that shit. And I know there's certain people that have a lot to lose that may have, you know, did some things in their careers where they felt like they had to do certain deals or they wouldn't have been able to move forward in their career. There's some people who knew that instead of compromising, stood on business and kept integrity in their music and knew that that would eventually have them shelved. But just for the sake of, all right, while I'm in this game, let me put this message out here. And, you know, and maybe this may be a hit, maybe this may be successful, but I know this is probably going to be a short run. But in this short run, when people come back to this 20 years from now, people will realize like, oh, I was willing to, you know, stand on business and put integrity and truth in the music versus, you know, selling out and putting out whatever message that they're telling me to put in the music so I can gain fame and acclaim and riches and all these things. And, you know, somebody that comes to mind when I think of that is, you know, usually like those artists from like the early 2000s who like are clearly talented, where talent isn't the question. But they, you know, don't get the shine that other artists do that are at the top. And it makes me think of Glenn Lewis. I was just thinking about that song, Don't You Forget It. And I was looking at this video, like, wow. And you know, and it's funny because that melody inspired a song on my project originally entitled Aloe, which is now Mascara. And I didn't realize it at the time. Like I knew when I was writing the song, like I've heard like a melody similar to that. I just couldn't put it, I couldn't figure out what song it was until like years later. And funny enough, you know, and I was just like, yo, where has he been at? Because he one of the better vocalists out here. But I feel like if you really look into like the symbolisms and stuff like that, Now, I'm not trying to put nobody on the spot, but look, I already put a PSA a while ago. Like, look, if you put the stuff in your work and I peep it, I'm going to put it out there. Because you put it in the work. If you put it in the art, even if people couldn't read what it was back then, we have the eyes to see it now. So I'm gonna shine the light on the things. And if people feel away, look, it is what it is. I'm gonna pray for you. I'm gonna make sure you protect it and this and that. But the fact that you have to like fear, whether you might be a target for speaking the truth says a lot about the system that's ruling these industries right now. Now, the ultimate point that I wanted to get to, with Nicki's interview with Erika Kirk. Now, like I said, I hadn't watched the full thing. And, I do think it's interesting that, I don't know, maybe Nicki has her own like personal agenda or something like that. And, and I'm not saying that's a bad thing. Like everybody has their personal agenda of why they go about, forming certain alliances or interacting with certain public figures in public spaces. A lot of times there's strategy behind it and there's an agenda, whether that artist knows or whether it's their team up to it. Usually somehow, some way, there's a strategy. However, I feel like Nicki wouldn't have gotten to where she is in her career if she wasn't smart. And if she wasn't someone that was in a position to make decisions in her career. So Nicki knows what she's doing. And especially in these last few years with her like going at it with Jay-Z publicly and really just been on his neck. I think that's interesting. But I think for her to take the risk of knowing her demographic, knowing her fan base, and having the interview with Erika Kirk and talking about just elevating and advocating for Christians, and ultimately her losing followers from it. Well, I think I saw that she lost like almost 10 million followers on Instagram for that. She knew the risk that would come with that. And I think it's interesting now. I mean, I know she had been talking about this in different spaces. I know she had an interview with the UN where she was advocating for Christians that were being, I believe, executed in Nigeria. So she had been speaking about this in different spaces. Now, I'm still like trying to like figure out the angle of her being a part of Turning Point, per se. Maybe it's intentionally trying to show like unity, because I've heard that Charlie Kirk criticized Nicki at one point in the past. And so to see her be in this space of being interviewed by his wife is interesting. I don't know if there's like some underlining like pettiness to it, or maybe a change of heart, or maybe like her recognizing some of the criticisms that he may have said, and showing like growth and evolution as an artist. I don't know the exact agenda with that, but I do think it's interesting that she was willing to take that risk, and be interviewed over there with conservatives. And I feel like the run that conservatives are having right now is very interesting, because for like, I don't know, a majority of like the 2010s, like liberals have been running things and holding the strength of the narrative, especially as it pertains to like the LGBTQ community and just like diversity for different minority groups and stuff like that. And I feel like liberals were very progressive in that way for a period of time. And then I think at some point it got to a space where the same hatred that we were calling out against the conservatives and Republicans, like Democrats and liberals, mostly liberals, I would say, started becoming the monster that they were like essentially trying to call out and destroy. Like the same hatred that they were calling out, they would participate in the same like hatred rhetoric. And I feel like, and then as it pertains to like trans rights, now I don't agree with the propaganda that I feel like is happening around trans folks. I understand why people don't understand it. on the conservative side, but I feel like they use that as a talking point to dissuade people away from liberalism, and it's working, and it's unfortunate. But I think it's more than just that, though. I do feel like liberals, a lot of times, for the same reason they were calling out Republicans and saying like, oh, they're racist and they're hateful, like liberals have slowly but surely become hateful and combative and violent in ways. And I mean, and but then again, like, then again, at the same time, the warfare is spiritual, because sometimes where we see things on the surface where it's like, oh, this trans kid shot up this school, and or this event happened. But then again, when you really break down the spiritual stuff that's happening behind the scenes, it's like, yes, that's the narrative that's happening on the surface, but there's more to it that's happening behind that. And that's where things get a little bit like, okay, like we could point the finger in many different directions at that point, but I'm not getting to that point right now. My main thing is like, I feel like right now where conservatives are thriving is one, like traditional values in terms of like the family unit and like the what is it, the nuclear family, and just wanting like basic things, and having like Christ be a focus. And I feel like, just to keep it real, I feel like a lot of the ways that Democrats were thriving in the last decade, or like the decade before last, like in the 2010s, because the thing with the Democrats, like they some real slick motherfuckers. I will say this, because they were very good at using diversity and equal opportunities and equal and love and marriage and the LGBTQ issues as a means to bridging different communities together and really being the side to show unity. And they have people that are very good talkers, very eloquent, educated folks that know how to play the game. However, I feel like a lot of how Democrats have risen up to power was a lot of that spiritual stuff happening in the background, and it's like y'all have the clean cut image, and y'all know who to talk to, your demographic, and you know who to talk to and how to talk to them and how to make them feel seen and heard, and push laws to, like have same-sex marriage be legal. And I think those things are important. And like I said, two things could be true at the same time. Like, it's not like they weren't doing good work. I do think that they were doing good work on the surface, but I do feel like in order to do those good works, you have to play both sides of the game. And I feel like we're seeing more now how Democrats were really like dabbling on that side of the game. And I'm not saying Republicans weren't either. But the main thing about Republicans is like speaking of Christianity, even if it's at their own detriment, because sometimes I feel like they use that Christianity thing as an excuse to be, what's the word? To be judgmental and to discriminate against different minority groups, because you can say, oh, but the Bible says this about homosexuality. And, and that's the tricky thing about religion, is like you could use the Bible to bend it to push whatever message that you're trying to push. So yeah, anyway, I say all that to say, it's very interesting to see what's happening in the world of like politics, in the world of pop culture, in the world of just everything that's like moving and shaking in the industry, and just how like the shift of power has done a lot of things. And I don't know, it's very interesting because, like I said, I'm independent. I've grown up like paying attention to politics from a liberal standpoint, because like my father would listen to a lot of liberal news. And I feel like in the school that I went to, like a lot of my friends were liberal, and I was in a debate club. And so that would kind of be like where I would lean. Nowadays, I would say I'm more like independent, there's certain things that I agree with on both sides, and there's things that I disagree with on both sides. And, I'm not gonna like tear down one for the other. I'm just gonna say like we all should be held accountable. And then at the same time, like if some people are doing good and they're winning, then we should highlight that regardless of how you feel about it. And that's essentially how I felt about Trump. Like in the beginning, I wasn't thrilled about him winning the election. I'm not gonna lie, because again, I voted for Kamala Harris, and there's not, and I don't agree with everything that he's done in his in this first year so far, but I do feel like he has had some accomplishments and some victories that I feel like people don't highlight enough, because it's just easy to like for the other side to just attack and dogpile on him and not give him credit, and it's easy to just like say, oh, but he's did this and he messed up this and ICE and immigration and all that stuff. And it's like, okay, but yeah, did I like the process of how they went about immigration? No. But was the lack of security on the borders a real issue? Yeah. And he campaigned and said that that was something that he was going to handle. And I mean, he handled it, you know? And I mean, there's other issues that we can get into, but that's not what this video is about. This video really is about like the spiritual aspect of what happens, or what I feel is happening in not just politics, but that's affecting and influencing these industries. And it's one thing to just look at like on the surface of like, oh, there's politics, and then you have the music industry and the tech industry and all this stuff. But we cannot ignore and be ignorant to the fact that what's really shaping all of this, what's more powerful than even the president, dare I say, more powerful than politics, than the government, is who's running the spiritual office. And that's what we need to be paying attention to. Those are the conversations that we need to be having out loud, because right now those conversations are happening in code, and I really don't care for that. I mean, I get why that's happening in code, but I'm not in these industries. I run my own business, and I'm my own entrepreneur. I sell my own CDs. I got my own product. So if you want to support me, donate to my Cash App, and purchase a CD. Or and if I see you, then I sell a CD that way. I'm not beholden by these industries. In ways, low key, I kind of am. I feel like I was born into some spiritual bullshit. But that's another conversation for another time. However, I don't have to play by these rules. Like I said, like as it pertains to the spiritual aspects of things, I'm pretty radical. And I'm cool claiming that, because I'm very clear on what I don't fuck with and what I do fuck with. And I understand that there are certain people in positions where they have to like play the game, just to like get by, even if they don't like the game, or even if they don't like the team that they're on and want to be on a different team. But like getting out of that is tricky, because like I said, this is a spiritual thing. It's not just like, oh, I don't want to be Democrat no more, so let me be Republican. Like it's not that simple. Like it's like soul ties, contracts, rituals, secrets. It's a lot of all of that. And all of those symbolic things are baked into all these industries, whether it's the music, whether it's the videos, whether it's the tech, whether it's the architecture in these buildings, whether it's the symbolisms of like the images and the artwork and the lobbies of the hotels. Like all of that shit is real. And if you don't have a discerning eye, you would just look over it and it would just mean nothing to you. And you would just be like, oh, this is a nice painting. Oh, this is a nice hotel. But if you don't know the history of that building, who built that building, was the architectural style Masonic? Because, aside from like the whole like secret society thing with Freemasons, like their thing is like around building and being builders and architecture and architects. So, that's a style of building. But that's also intentional too. That's also can be seen as a symbolic thing too, that can be used on the spiritual side. But you have to know these things and understand these references to even be able to peep that, and I say that from like being in a space where I was researching real estate, and and they have this whole process of like, getting like the, what's it called? When you get the house appraised, and then you have somebody inspect it, see if the roof needs to get done, see if this needs to get done. And then if you do that research of knowing when was the house built, when was the last time they got the roof replaced, when was the last time they got the furnace done, And then understanding that even in those, what company did they use to get the furnace? Because you know what's interesting? The furnace and at the old house that I lived at, it was a Smith furnace. And I mean, Smith could be a lot of things, but you know, my initial thought when I think of Smith, and mind you, a lot of computer old tech down in my basement, and you know, and it makes me, my immediate thought was like, Smith, like the agent in the Matrix, because sometimes it's symbolic just like that. Now, the person naming the company, was that their intention? I don't know, but the person buying the product and knowing these things and knowing symbolism and knowing deeper meanings and knowing that the people with the naked eye is probably not either going to notice that. Yeah, that's how they get away with the programming and the MK Ultra and all of that stuff, because all of that is real. So yeah, this conversation got like a lot deeper than I wanted to. um I just wanted to talk about these situations on the surface, but then I got like inspired and inclined to really get into the nitty gritties. And you know, I'll just say this, um, because yesterday was Christmas, right? And so I treated myself to going to the movies, and I saw Marty Supreme with Timothy Chalamet. It's a good movie. And you know, and I expected it to be so because I mean, Timothy Chalamet isn't really in bad movies. Like, I mean, maybe early in his career, and I don't know. I don't know. But there's an announcement, but I'm going to talk over it anyway. I'm just going to say that was a good movie. And I mean, the thing about that movie isn't different than any other movie. Like, all of these movies have like hidden messages and symbolisms and all that stuff, and like all of them, they all do. Especially if they have been made through major studios, um, you know, and have like major backing. And if it's not like an independent project, then most likely there's probably these like, you know, deeper meanings and symbols and all that stuff. And I'm just gonna say that movie was really good. That's all I'm saying. I'm just gonna say that that movie was good, and I learned some new things about table tennis that I did not know before, and how, you know, and something as simple as like them playing with orange balls rather than white balls, because if somebody's wearing a white shirt, you know, sometimes seeing it across the table, you can't really see it that well. But if you have an orange shirt, it stands out a little bit differently, and it allows you to be able to see it a little bit better. Um, yeah, yeah, that was y'all did that. Y'all did that. And you know what? And Kevin O'Leary, he, I don't know if that was his Let There Be Light. Hold on. Yeah, let there be light. I don't know if this was his first time acting, but he did that. Now, I think it might not have been too like difficult for him to pull like to play that character, because he like played this like business owner, you know, shifty guy that was like, I don't know, like in a elite world, and really just trying to profit and gain success and all of these things, right? And it's not too far from his like real life persona, especially like if you've seen like Shark Tank or whatever. The interesting thing about him, there was this scene in the movie. Now, let me know if I'm tripping or not. I don't know. Maybe there was a different movie that I was watching versus a movie that anybody else was watching. But at the end of the movie, spoiler alert, spoiler alert, spoiler alert, spoiler alert. If you haven't seen the movie, I'm going to spoil a scene, just one scene. There's a moment where he's having a conversation with Timothy Chalamet's character, and he said, and I forget the time period of this movie. I feel like it was like the early 1900s. He said something like he was born in 16 something, and he, you know, he's played this game for a long time, and you know, and so, and you know, and when he said, I was like, 16, damn, that's a long time. I'm like, that gave me like, oh, are we talking about vampires? Are we talking about reincarnation? Like, and it just like, and there's just certain scenes with him that just seemed very like, if you just like look at him and how he was grinning, hoping for Timothy Chalamet's character to lose the battle or lose the game, because he was like, the deal was for him to lose so he could like get paid and then hopefully get to the championship or whatever, and Kevin O'Leary's character was going to pay him or whatever, so he was like grinning and all this stuff, and it was just something so devious and demonic about it. And I'm just like, and you know how sometimes you can see certain people and you gotta like squint a little hard or whatever. Yeah, that was an interesting. I was like, now I know this is a period piece, but my nigga, he said I was born in 16 something. If y'all seen the movie and you know what I'm talking about, let me know in the comments. I know I wasn't tripping when I heard that. I was like, hold on, what? I was like, oh yeah, no, this movie is in layers. This is layers, and I feel like we're talking about some spiritual stuff here. Yeah, because reincarnation, that's a thing. Spiritual warfare, that's a thing. And especially when you're somebody that's talented in any field, it don't matter what it is, whether it's sports, whether you're in tech, whether you're in music, whether you're in business, it don't matter. The higher you go, the darker it is. The higher you go, the more you're gonna have to do these weird things and humiliation rituals, and you gotta do weird shit, just to see if you're gonna compromise on your integrity to keep elevating, and if you're willing to compromise and sell a little bit of this part of your soul, and then they'll keep funding what you got going on. And I remember seeing this post on X like a few months ago that was like, this guy was telling a friend, he was like, I don't want you to make a penny more than, what was it? I think it was like maybe like 499.999.999 million. Because once the people that cross over to that bracket, I think of like 500 million. I think it might have been less than that, but basically like in the 100 millions. It was like, once you cross over that threshold in the 100 millions, the shit that happened up there, it gets weird up there. It gets weird. And not only that, but it's just certain shit that you see people do to compromise just to stay in those spaces. And it's like, at that point, do you really even need that much money? Because at that point, your bills are paid, right? All you need is a house, some food, and I don't know, if you want to raise a family, it costs $1 million per kid. I mean, and I always thought that was interesting, and that was something that stuck with me, and I think about that often. I forget who said the tweet and what the exact number was, but I know it was something along the lines of like 100 in the 100 millions. It was like, once you make a penny over like 300 million, or I think it was like either like 300 million or 400 million or something like that, or like maybe 500 million. That's where things get a little bit, and yeah. And I feel like at that point in the game, that's when you gotta like do a lot of compromising and playing both sides. Or maybe you just like the dark side, and it's okay. And my thing is, like, I don't want to be like super judgmental, because funny enough, I remember. All right, this is the last point I'm gonna make, because then I gotta get up out of here anyway. I was working at East Meets West, which was my like spiritual, metaphysical hippie store with the crystals and tarot cards and all of that stuff, right? And we would have like some, not too many baneful things. Like, we sold like Ouija boards, but we were intentional about like separating the peace off the board. So the board that was on display and the piece that like slides on the board was in a box all the way in the back. So like, wasn't no weird shit happening. Um, and we were intentional about like, you know, keeping the energy and the vibes cleansed and clear and all that stuff, prior to, you know, things going awry with them or whatever. But that's a whole nother story for another time. I remember there was some like this girl that came in here. It was a kid, mind you. They were pretty young, maybe like a preteen or something like that. And they were telling me that they were a Satanist. And you know, that was their spiritual belief or whatever. And I think they were with like a group of kids where they had like a chaperone. And the chaperone was just kind of there, like just letting them do their thing, and it's just like whatever, that's what this kid is into for now, whatever. But she was like really adamant about it. And I wasn't judgmental, you know, because I'm like, I know that there are people who are. Um, you know, and at that time I didn't realize how like deep the spiritual thing was. Like I had an understanding of it, but I didn't realize how like deep it is as it pertains to like how it literally affects like industries and cultures and stuff like that. But she was telling me about it and she was like, yeah, like, you know, I do these rituals and I pray like this and this and that. And she was explaining it like it was a regular religion. It's just her religion was Satanism. I was like, all right. I wasn't like phased by it. Like it didn't like freak me out like most people would be. So like I was understanding of it. I didn't agree with it, but I understand that there are people who are that. And my thing is like, you know, what your spiritual belief is what your spiritual belief is, even if it's something like on the darker side of things. Because let's be real, if we want to keep it all the way a being, like to be balanced in this world, there has to be acknowledgement of light and darkness, and acknowledging that we all have some darkness within ourselves. It's just a matter of how far into the darkness that you're willing to get into, and what lines you're willing to cross and which lines you aren't. I have lines that I'm not willing to cross. And so for me, you know, my whole thing is like, now that I know what I know, and I've been through the experiences that I've had through these last few years, and actual like, you know, experience with like spiritual warfare and like, you know, having to protect yourself and dealing with threats and like, you know, energetic things. Like, you know, I still wouldn't be as judgmental to that kid because they were a kid. Like, you know what I mean? Versus people who are like, you know, grand wizard warlocks that have like decades of experience into like ritualistic practices and stuff like that. Like, you know, I think is a difference between that. And for me, you know, I'm here for the movement of like elevating Jesus. And you know, and as it pertains to my own personal religion, that's a whole nother conversation for another time. And I got to get off of here because the library is closing up and I got to leave. But you know, my whole thing is like, look, I don't mind what your spiritual belief is as long as it's not a detriment to me or it doesn't cause harm or whatever. But the warfare is spiritual, and you know, all right, and you know, and I'm just willing. There's just certain things I'm not beat for. I'm just not. You know, like especially as it pertains to being a woman, especially as it pertains to like children and bringing children into the world, and just like how like energy harvesting and just like the things that I've like seen and experienced, and knowing what I would not want to continue to go through and wouldn't want like to go through in the next generation. So for me, I have like, sorry, I'm like trying to balance my phone as I like put my shoes on and get ready to go. But like, yeah, like I'm very clear on my stance. And yeah, and I just wanted to say that. Much love to y'all. God bless y'all. Have a good night. And yeah, I gotta get up out of here. So yeah, bye. Much love.